I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, and possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam, my strange little alien friend. We're going to be talking about some people like you. Did I say people? No, I didn't mean that, Liam. Actually, we are going to be talking about aliens. Not quite the little gray ones, though, like you, my friend. And I want to thank you, listener, for tuning into this episode of The Oracles with James Tyson. That's me, James Tyson. Today I'm introducing you to a fellow here in the Pacific Northwest, a fellow Cascadian, David Chace. That's C-H-A-C. And he's one of those anomalies out there that doesn't have a website. And it's kind of interesting, though. You can come see him on Facebook. If you do have Facebook, if you're one of those people who still have Facebook, he's David Chace on Facebook. He moderates a couple of paranormal Facebook pages too. I think it's Extraterrestrial Life and Reptilian Gates, and I'll give you an idea why he's talking about the reptilian gates in a second here. See, David has a bit of an interest and bit of a unique experience. It's kind of interesting on where he's gone in his life. Now, he's an illustrator and a researcher with a real interest in the experience of alien contact. And in particular, alien beings with reptilian features, or a lot of us just, call them the reptiles or reptilians. One of his goals is to create a taxonomy of the different alien species visiting this planet based on eyewitness descriptions and their drawings, what they hand him, and he interviews them. His educational background is in biology, ecology, and evolution, and these kind of influence what he focuses on. And so he gives a bit of an idea of what something of a reptilian background may look like. His knowledge of these areas really forms the perspective of his UFO contact experiences. He kind of really draws on his educational background. When someone's trying to explain to him that they saw a 6-foot-tall green thing show up in their backyard, and half their family has called them crazy and the other half doesn't talk to them anyway, at least David will sit down with them, legitimately listening to their stories and taking whatever diagrams they may have sketched, some kind of idea, as opposed to drawing it out in a real harsh interview interrogation technique. He'll just listen to them talk, and he'll sketch, and he'll share with them as he's creating the diagram of the being that they had an encounter with, which is like a forensic artist, or I think in the episode I call him a one of those composite drawers, but he doesn't really have in a composite drawing. You have a bunch of different pieces you have in books, or you can show somebody about 10 sets of eyes and they pick them. He'll actually lead them through, let them get an idea or give him an idea of what these things look like, and he will create the image based on their interview. And it's fascinating. And he's putting these works together. He did have a book out a few years ago, a pamphlet with a number of these in here, and I'm nagging him to try to get it republished, maybe come out with a lot more of his experiences that he's had with interviewing those who have come in contact with alien beings. And again, we're walking into this interview like aliens exist. We're not here to prove it to you. I'm not here to drill into him and interrogate David on the people that he talks to. It's just a conversation. And I'm really interested in finding out what it is that he's been up to. And he's been doing this for about 20 years. And we actually touch on an experience he had while he was at a camp back east, and his experience witnessed by a number of other people of a being or an anomaly or something that happened while they were on that trip. So this is my friend, David Chace, a forensic artist who specializes in dragging out those descriptions of alien beings that you may have encountered with. And if you know anybody who wants to do this, again, the only way you can get a hold of him right now is on his Facebook page, David Chace, at CHACE, David Chace, and check him out there and send him a note via Messenger and drive him crazy, because I know he likes kind of stuff like that. And he stays up late all the time anyway. He barely sleeps, which I probably would do the same thing if I had experiences like he has and have to listen to people talk about great, big green scaly things coming out of the dark at them. Yeah, I probably wouldn't want to sleep either. So let's bring him in. David, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
It was really nice to talk to you. I am up the I-5 here in the northern part of the Pacific Northwest, or in my case, in my country, the Pacific Southwest. And you were down in Seattle.
That's correct.
So we're Cascadians.
Yes.
I grew up with J.P. Patches. You might be too young, but
yeah, I don't remember him until hearing about him later when I was in my 20s. So.
Oh, you missed so much, my friend. And for those listeners out there who don't know what we're talking about, it's the Pacific Northwest guy out of I think KVOST in Seattle's or Bellingham, where I used to watch them through, but it came out of Seattle, and it was a kids program, a guy dressed up as a clown, and it was hilarious. When we all had, I think every city in North America had one of those TV shows, and they were fantastic when you're a little kid. But yeah, JP Patches was our guy. This is what's really interesting about what you do, David, is, and we kind of touched a little bit about it when we're off air, is like you're like a composite artist where you go to the police and say, hey, I was mugged by a guy and did the robber look like this? And they drew the picture and you look at the stick character or whatever. But you actually been doing that for people who've had experiences with ETs. How the heck did you get into that?
All right, well, first of all, let's say to go into I consider it's more like a forensic artist and not necessarily a composite artist, because a composite artist will they'll show the person images of eyes, nose, chin, etc., and then kind of put it together. I do more where I actually try to, usually in most cases, I talk to them and try to get them to do me a sketch or drawing, or even if it's not that great, I can usually use that. I need a starting point is the thing, a visual starting point. But sometimes if they don't provide me with that, sometimes they'll find an image on the internet that says it's close, but modify this, and this. So they'll show me that. I'll use that. Occasionally, if I'm sitting with someone, then they'll just tell me, and then I'll just start drawing and do it that way. But yeah, it's a little different from composite work is a specific sort of forensic reconstruction, and is not quite what I do, but there's some similarities. I kind of dabble in that as a form. But yeah, to tell you how I got started, basically in the I've been drawing since I was 5 years old, at least, so I was born in 70, so I was drawing, I guess I started out drawing animals, and then by the late 70s I was drawing dinosaurs, and they were kind of a favorite subject of mine. And I wasn't great back then, but everyone around me told me I was, so that kind of encouraged me. I guess it was obvious, to my parents and stuff, that I had some talent in that area. Yeah. And then in the mid-'80s, I started getting interested in UFOs, and I guess I forget exactly, might have been 87. My dad took me to, I lived in California at the time in Monterey, and at Monterey Peninsula College, a researcher from MUFON named Tom Gates came and did a slideshow about UFOs, and my dad took me to that, and that's kind of when I really started getting into it. But I didn't actually meet any contactee, abductee, experiencer, anyone with direct experience like that until 1991 at UFO Contact Center International in Federal Way, Washington. And that's when I met Garnett Doonan, and she had encounters with a variety of different beings, and that's kind of how I got started.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it was quite a, I would say young age, but when you were, it's not something you just picked up in the last 5 years, so it's actually pretty good. You've had this much experience. Yeah,
I've been working with experiencers since '91, but it's like I go is off and on. Sometimes I go into fallow period for several years. I mean, it was really intense from like probably because at 91 I was still in college, so it was, and that was at UC Santa Cruz. It was only when I was coming up here to the Northwest during the summers that I would attend like UFO Contact Center meetings in Federal Way, and I'd get maybe one or two each summer, I guess. But then '93 I got out of college, graduated with a degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Biology and a concentration in Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior. And that actually ties into my interest in extraterrestrial civilizations and the distribution of civilizations in the galaxy and what kind of beings are out there and so forth. But at that point, then I was able to join the local MUFON chapter, which is the Mutual UFO Network, as well as continuing to attend UFO CCI. And then later in the 90s, a gentleman named Terry Burris took over the group from Eileen Garut, who had been doing it. And then Terry's group was the Northwest UFO or Seattle UFO Discussion Group, but it was like a continuation with a lot of the same members who'd been meeting in Federal Way. And we were just meeting in Seattle, but it was like through that and through MUFON, I was able to meet a lot of experiencers, abductees, contactees, which words basically people who've had some sort of usually physical contact with aliens or extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or whatever you want to call them.
Wow. And you've got quite a little kind of like on Facebook, as my tongue gets back to working here again, on Facebook, you have a couple of groups there. The Extraterrestrial Life has a number of your pictures on there.
Yeah, I think that's the page set up by Eddie Mueller from Mexico City. He's like really incredible. He's like totally bilingual. He can speak like Mexican Spanish perfectly and American English, and he can switch back and forth. He does a lot of what do you call it? He's an interpreter professionally, but he's also very interested in extraterrestrial life, so and UFO experiences and so forth. So he manages that page.
Yeah, it's I kind of bounced over there and I just saw a couple of things you posted, and some of the art that is on there. As you're getting into this, and if people want to get a hold of you, and if they've had an experience and they want to like explain what they saw to you, how do they get a hold of you?
I guess the best way to contact me would be through my Facebook page, through Messenger on Facebook, and I will see. Usually, it's like in message requests, it'll show up, and then I can, depending on how coherent they are, I'll like either. I'm not like, I don't talk to everyone, but I do try. Anyone who has an experience, I'll try to get in touch with them. And at least if they need something, but if I only do the drawings if I feel motivated and inspired, and that kind of comes and goes. And of course, it depends a lot on who it is who's who's contacting me, and whether they can provide me with the starting point I need, and whether it's looks like it's going to be something special. I mean, my real interest to a lot of degree is reptilians. And so if a lot of times I'm more inclined to work with someone who's seen reptilians rather than just sort of a generic gray alien or something like that. I guess my page is at facebook.com/David W. Chace. Important to remember that Chace is Chace. And then they can find me on Facebook that way.
David, what is it with reptilians that fascinates you more than anything else?
Well, all right. So when I was about 5 years old, I remember in kindergarten learning about dinosaurs. And I was fascinated with dinosaurs. Of course, that was a time... that was like the mid-'70s, and I guess they were rerunning Land of the Lost, the original series on TV, and so that was like my favorite Saturday morning program. And I just loved dinosaurs. And then, as I got to be about 7 years old, when I was 7, maybe 6, I caught my first lizard, or probably 6, which was like a baby alligator lizard, which is a common species in the Monterey, California area. And then when I turned 7, I caught a ringneck snake underneath a piece of bark next to a fire trail I used to always walk on in the woods there. And so I got really into snakes and lizards. And then in '79, we moved to Hawaii, and I lived there for 4 years, and they didn't have any snakes apart from blind snakes. And the one time I saw a blind snake, I thought it was a worm. So they're not a very impressive snake, but in Hawaii they do have a lot of lizards, so I enjoyed the lizards there. And then came back in '83 to Monterey, and that's where I kind of grew up until the early '90s. Then I went to college at UC Santa Cruz and then moved up to Seattle. But yeah, so I mean, I was fascinated with reptiles the whole time, whether it's dinosaurs or snakes or lizards, and then of course in the early '90s, I was like watching Sightings, which was a TV show back then, and John Carpenter, who was at the time he was director of UFO abduction studies for MUFON or whatever, and he talked about the reptilian type on an episode of Sightings, and I thought, this is fascinating, because by that time I was totally into UFOs and aliens, and of course I've always been interested in reptiles. So if you can tie the two together in one thing, then they said, okay, I'm going to find cases of people who've seen reptilians. And of course, Garnett Doonan in 1991 told me, yeah, that's one of the types of aliens she'd seen. In her case, they were guards. They were, she never really saw much of them, but when she was like on like the space colony or whatever, they would be guarding the doorway, and there would be like a reptilian on each side. Or in one case, she was in what she thinks is an underground base, and there was a reptilian guarding a specific room. He was just like in the door of the room, and they were very muscular, heavy bone structure. And that particular species of reptilian had very bumpy scales. They had pronounced tendons on the neck. They had sort of a hard plate on the chest, like a plastron, which kind of like a turtle shell sort of thing. And she was able to describe it in great detail. So I did some drawings and paintings of that being, and then Garnett was a great artist herself. I don't think she's doing the art anymore, but at the time, she did a lot of fantastic art, which gave me a lot of material to work from as far as doing my own illustration. So yeah, starting as far back in 1991, I was hearing about the reptilian beings and fascinated with it.
In your experience and your conversations with people who have come to you and say, this is what I've witnessed, do you find that in your case, because you're interested in the reptilian stuff, do their descriptions of these beings change much?
Do you mean change over time, or change from one individual to another?
From one individual to another, or are they quite similar?
There's kind of a typical reptilian, or a kind of an average reptilian, which is usually about 6.5 to 7 feet tall, very muscular, pronounced tendons on the neck, heavy bone structure, like usually a ridge down the middle of the forehead, eyes, fairly large eyes usually with a bright gold or yellow iris, sometimes red or orange, vertical slit pupil. The hands vary. Sometimes it's like 3 fingers and a thumb, sometimes it's 4 fingers and a thumb, and usually claws, like kind of a lizard talon sort of thing. Or at least thick fingernails, and usually some webbing between the fingers. And that's sort of the generic standard reptilian, I guess, but there's a lot of variations. There's like dwarf reptilians that are only like 4 feet tall, tend to be thinner. Among even like the tall ones, they're not all the same kind of like super muscular. Some of them are more like just one witness described one as built like a water polo player. So, he's muscular, but he's not like overbuilt like some of them are described as linebackers or something. So, but very human-like builds, and but lots of variations. The scale, the way the scales flow on the body, the type of scales, the pattern of the scales, the coloration, all of that varies quite a bit from one case to the next. So it varies enough. I mean, some of them have tails and some don't, and the tails are different. There's enough variation that you could say there are several, I'd say dozens of different species. So yeah, quite a lot of variation, way more variation than I was expecting when I first started looking into it, but still a lot of commonalities at the same time.
A friend of mine who is a intuitive, and she sees things. Well, like some intuitives do, but she's part of a paranormal team out in West Virginia. She was out in that area, and they went to a location that was haunted, and she was standing outside, and while she was standing waiting for the rest of the team, a beam of light, she saw it out of the corner of her eye to her left, and she looked at this beam of light, looked at where it landed on the ground beside her, and a little reptilian about 4 feet tall appeared wearing a tool belt. And she said it looked at her, focused on her, took a deep breath, sighed, shook his head, stepped back in the light, and disappeared again. It was like it came down and was like, oh crap, you can see me? And then it left. She said, yeah, this flipping reptilian with a tool belt. I don't know what the heck he was there to build or tune up or whatever, but he came in and was a little choked that she could see him, and he left.
Yeah.
And that was the first time she had seen anything that she would describe as extraterrestrial.
Yeah. Well, one of the first illustrations to appear in the literature of a reptilian, I believe, was by Bill Hamilton, who was, I think he's down from Arizona, and he's I think both an experiencer and a researcher, and I think it was his experience seeing this reptilian, but there's this drawing he published of a reptilian that seemed to be wearing sort of a utility belt or a tool belt, you could say. So yeah, sometimes they appear like naked, which for them isn't really naked because they're covered with thick, scaly skin, and sometimes they'll appear in sort of a jumpsuit, or they may have a vest, or often a cloak or a robe or a cape, or sometimes just a belt. But the belt has come up in a number of cases.
Have you ever heard about one showing up almost like in monks, like a monk robe?
Yeah, that's actually fairly common. And I've heard different reasons, like the one case, one of the most fascinating cases, individual I worked with in the 1994, I met with this person twice, and the description was, so this individual I was working with was someone who did hypnotherapy and was working with a woman who apparently had been having contact with some reptilians and was trying to get at what the experience was in this individual's home, and she was on the couch. He was working with her, and he saw the impression of a hand appear, like, I guess, on her arm or her shoulder, like an invisible being was there kind of holding her by the arm. And then, like, moments later, this being materialized, and it was a hooded being wearing, like, a monk's robe. Of the color was what was it? It was kind of a red, how did he describe it? But kind of a purplish red color. Mm-hmm. And the being had its arms folded across its chest. The head was bowed and looked just kind of like a monk standing there. Although when the being first appeared, there was like a crackle in the air, like static electricity. And there was a rush of air, maybe rushing out of the place where the being materialized. And also a stench, like he described it as, I think, rotting fish. Then he engaged in a conversation like, "Are you a master teacher?" And the being spoke apparently out loud rather than telepathically with a very kind of hissy, gravelly voice saying, "You may address me as such." And then he said, "Are you of the light, of Christ light?" And the being remained silent. And at some point, the being lifted the hood off her head, and because it was a female reptilian, and like opened up her robe, and underneath there was like a vest, and had something of a look like a Roman soldier in terms of something of the way the robe hung off the shoulders, but the being kind of was very muscular, and we learned that her name was Ruby through whatever their communication was. The being at that point kind of tried to instill fear in him, saying, "You cannot fight what you cannot see," and so he was studying her basically and trying not to give her fear, even though that's what she was looking for. And he realized that he was kind of trying to stand his ground. And I forget exactly how the experience ended, but after a few moments, I think Ruby just like disappeared. I think that's kind of how it ended. Yeah, definitely like a monk's robe. She was at least trying to present herself initially as some kind of a spiritual teacher or whatever. But whoever she was, she had some kind of she was very protective, and maybe even possessive of the woman who the therapist was working with, and was trying to say, "Hey, back off. This is my property," and trying to scare him. But that didn't work. And I met with him a couple times in '94, and the second time was after he had just done a regression on himself. I mean, I forget if he was I think someone else regressed him, but just to kind of clarify the visual experience in his mind. And so when he came to the door, his first words were charcoal green gray. And because he gave a vivid description of the color of Ruby's, her skin, it was like a dark color. He described it dark like an alligator. But Ruby has lots of beautiful visual details around her, like the upper and lower lid of her eye was like yellow scalation, and then the ridge on her forehead was kind of more of a yellow, and then her snout was lighter, more yellowish. And then I think her chest was lighter, more towards the yellow. But then as you got to her shoulders and her scalp and so forth, you got into the dark charcoal green gray colors. And she had smooth scales, a little bit of sheen to them. Very beautiful being if you're someone who likes reptiles. And certainly I owned a pet boa constrictor for 34 years, and I loved looking at reptiles, and I would love to have seen Ruby myself to see what this being really looked like.
I was down at the Alien Con in Los Angeles in June of 2019, and I do a thing I call a stand-up reading, where people will come to me, and if I look at them, I'll have a family member come through, and I see them on my right, which is their left. And on their right, on my left, I see what I describe as angels. It was the first time at the conference where I was actually seeing beings about a car length behind them. And they were big. They were big, like shaman-looking beings, primarily with people from Central America, Mexico, and Southwest indigenous population, Native Americans. One of the people, and this was really not disturbing, but it was very interesting, because the being that showed up a car length behind them was about 7 feet tall, and what I described them as is like wearing a monk's robe, but it wasn't like a floppy hat. It was like in a V shape, like where the face would be in it was like a big empty black diamond shape. So the head was very big, very tall and kind of pointy, and this thing was a diamond shape. And I was explaining that to a very well-known psychic who had worked for the federal government in the United States, worked for the FBI, and working for families for missing people. And she said, "Oh yeah, that's a reptilian. That was an ET." And that's what it was doing. It stepped in like as to say to me, "Okay, what are you up to? Like, what are you doing? Passing what are you doing with this girl?" It didn't say that, but I had this feeling he was kind of stepping, he or she or whatever it was stepping in as more as a protective being to this person. But I didn't think of it at the time as an ET, and that was pointed out to me later. But it was. She said, "Yeah, it was a reptilian ET that stepped in." And I went, "Oh, that's fascinating. I've never seen that before." And which then she ridiculed me and said, "Yeah, probably you have. You just give them different names. You just assume that they're some kind of human being or something, or large human shaman, but they're most likely an ET of some sort." So it was kind of fascinating when you were talking about Ruby and her description and what she was doing, wondering why the person doing the therapy, and what were they doing to the being, the human that either they were looking after or looking out for or whatever.
Yeah, there's definitely some ambiguity. A lot of people feel that when people who are reptilian contactees will sometimes feel that the reptilians are their star family, that maybe they've had a past life as a reptilian, and these are like family coming to them. And then among reptilians, there seem to be wars going on between different factions of reptilians representing different civilizations or whatever it is. And so people will have negative experiences as well as positive experiences, depending maybe on which reptilian they're interacting with, or sometimes they'll have both negative and positive experiences with the same reptilian. Ruby, the therapist, didn't like the fact that Ruby was definitely trying to intimidate him and put fear in him, but at the same time it might have been just more of a protective kind of thing, that she was looking out for the person that she was protecting or whatever. So I don't know.
Yeah, when speaking to some people who kind of fill me in on what the heck a MyLab was in regards to people who have had experiences with extraterrestrials and then are basically pulled away by the military and interrogated on what they knew and who it was that picked them up and what they saw, and what, basically grilling them on, debriefing them with extreme prejudice on what experience they had. Because some of those people claim, they were abducted by the military, but there were ETs working with the military. So it was like, okay, is it, we have this warring faction out there, and the military has some partners with the ETs that are warring with another group, and they want to know a little bit more about maybe who picked you up, why they picked you up, who were they, what did they look like, and going through that whole thing. So it kind of adds a little more weight to the possibility of more than one group out there and all trying to gather information on each other, and some are a little more protective, and some are those people who have encounters with, we'll call it some reptilians. Those reptilians are holding their cards a little bit close to the vest and don't really want to step forward and pass on too much information, because they're one group and they don't want the other group to know who they're connected to or what they're up to.
Yeah, I've definitely talked to people who've had, what they call the MyLab or the military abduction experience, and in some cases, these military or military-looking humans who are involved in that, they might have a reptilian or a small alien like a gray or something working with them, or Nordic type aliens, which are human-looking beings or whatever. My impression of what's going on is that it's not like there's one group representing the human military who's doing this. It's more like there are compartmentalized programs within military and in the intelligence community, or perhaps government contractors like aerospace corporations. And these compartmentalized programs are kind of running in parallel with each other, maybe not even knowing that the other program exists. And this one might have a relationship with one particular group of ETs, and this other program might be running alongside, not even knowing, or actually working against that other one with a relationship with some other group. And I think it has to do with reincarnation, or with the people having, ET souls and making agreements with the group that would be called their star family or whatever, and then they're born as a human being, and they may grow up and join the military or whatever, and then they end up like working in that fashion. But anytime you get humans abducting other humans, then it gets very disturbing, because aliens, I can like excuse them doing that, because okay, I look at that as like wildlife biologists picking up a deer, tranquilizing it, putting a tag on its ear, and using it to track the population of deer and make sure the population is healthy, or gain information about their migratory patterns or whatever. So I don't really mind aliens doing it to humans, but when humans are doing it to other humans, then it gets fairly morally questionable.
Yeah, you're also dealing with the morals of the aliens themselves. It's what they're up to in partnership with a small group of humans, or what maybe our governments have decided to kind of throw their sponsorship in with one particular group of aliens, hoping that group are the good guys. Who's to tell they are the good guys or not?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't even think of it in terms of the government so much as there might be one particular general who kind of started this series of programs, or then there's another guy in the Navy who's doing another thing, and it's I don't think it's not like Big Brother so much as it's a lot of little brothers all. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things, because I worked for the federal government for 28 years, and one person's conspiracy is another person's policy. From the outside looking in, you're saying, oh, this is a big conspiracy, they're keeping this from us. And on the inside, you're going, yeah, it's our policy to keep it from you. So the people working within the machine don't see it as a conspiracy. They just show up to work and say, "Oh, here's our book. This is our policy on dealing with the media or dealing with people, or the privacy of files and file sharing." And that policy has always been in place. If you're in the Mounties here, policy was always considered a guideline, but you'd still get crap when you broke it. And you say, "Well, you said it was a guideline." Yes, but that's only when you're following it. When you break the policy, then we're going to dump on you. We never thought of it as a bad thing. And if you didn't like the policy, you could always write up a new one and hand it in and say, things have changed. We don't really have to do that anymore. That was 50 years ago. It's now this year. And, what do you think about it? Oh, okay, that makes sense. That was in a book 50 years ago. No one really pays attention to that anymore. But policy and conspiracy, holy cow. Whether these isolated groups, these smaller groups are factions within a government or within an organization, are keeping everything broken down in cells away from other groups, or the main government, let's say. Maybe they're doing that for a reason. Maybe it always was that way. It worked. That was the policy. And, it comes down to that whole blanket need to know thing. And a lot of this stuff, it's nice to know. It'd be really cool to know. But if one person out of 10 said, I can handle it, and I demand you release it, well, that's only 10%. The 90% might friggin' flip when they find out Gorn from Star Trek was actually a real thing. And which is funny, because when I think of the Arena episode in Star Trek and Kirk fighting Gorn And you look at that in the lizard suit back in the day. That looks like a lot of the drawings that you would probably do. And great, now I'm not going to get that music out of my head. And either are you. You're welcome.
Yes, I mean, some of them have. I mean, generally a reptilian has. They don't always have the huge long snout like that, but at least they tend to have like at least sort of a blunt muzzle that has some sort of a lizard-like appearance. So yeah, and I should, as far as these my lab groups, that I think if people leave, a lot of people when they're as part of this group. They may know whatever their specific mission is, like you're going out to abduct this individual and bring them to this location and whatever. But maybe at the end of the day, they get the flashy thing from Men in Black, or they're injected with something in the arm, or they do something with sound and it affects the memory. So they go home and they don't remember what they're doing during the day. I mean, I've heard enough stories to suggest that there are technologies they have that can interfere with memory, and that that's part of the mechanism by which this all is kept secret. And that's one of the reasons why I look at it as not a grand conspiracy, but more like a bunch of individual cells, each doing their own project for whatever goals that they have.
It'd be interesting, or if it ever comes out, what those goals were. Richard
Dolan, I'm sure you're aware of, and he talks about what he calls the Breakaway Civilization, which is sort of a covert group, which I think is many groups that possess technology that's way ahead of everyone else. And one area would certainly be things like implants and the ability to, control or manipulate memory in order to suppress memories of specific experiences. What my attitude is that the breakaway civilization cannot stay broken away forever. That eventually, this stuff is going to come out, and so whatever projects they're working on, whatever research they're doing, that will become available to the wider human civilization. And then exactly how that's going to happen, I don't know, but there's a lot of things that are changing really quickly with the development of artificial intelligence and so technological development in so many areas that eventually, that all is going to, a lot of it anyway, is going to come out as far as what has been going on.
Yeah, I remember there was a fellow named Randy Kramer who claims that he was spent 17 years on Mars and 3 years on the moon. And for the Breakaway Civilization, I think there was the 3 ways to recruit you. Some were taken, some were asked, and some were made, which was kind of spooky. They were... that's one of the things Randy Kramer were talking about. Even Laura Eisenhower, great-granddaughter of President Eisenhower, had a chance to talk to her a couple of years ago, and she thought she was targeted even before she was born. And, somebody had asked her if she wanted to go off to work on a base on a planet sometime at some point, and she turned them down. Interesting. Very, very interesting. And yeah, I know I had a real brief conversation with Richard about this at one of the conferences I was at. It was very, very interesting getting into that and trying to figure out if where we all fit in the great scheme of things, whether we're just Earth itself is just a big petri dish of an experiment, and then there's some picking and choosing on who they're going to take from this petri dish and go off and start again.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories about Mars and a lot of contentious claims, and I'm skeptical about a lot of it, but at the same time, I know there are people who've had, personal experiences. There's a woman I know who's had what she sort of like, I guess through hypnotic regression, answers coming about her reptilian family having some connection with Mars in the past. I mean, I don't know if Mars was ever a thriving biosphere like the Earth is today, but I certainly consider it's possible that there's been activity up there for a long time. But again, when I hear a lot of stories, I have to be very skeptical and it would just admit that we don't know what's really going on. We just have clues here and there, and then there's human deception, and then there's actual reality, and that is something that over time, eventually we're going to Mars. We'll do we'll start doing some digging there. Maybe we'll find something that says, oh, well, look at this. It's the remains of base from like 50,000 years ago or something like that. So like there were beings here. It'll be interesting to see as the space program continues moving forward, what we can actually learn. But there's so many claims now about, Richard Hoagland has his thing about the face on Mars, which I feel is just kind of an eroded hill after the better photos of it came out in like the late 90s. But, you don't know. There could still be something up there.
Oh yeah, there could be, and now we get more and more into the ideas too, and the talk about parallel universes, parallel dimensions. There could be something there right now. We just don't have it within our ability to see it, because we see things at a specific spectrum. So maybe when you're there is something you may bump into it as you're walking, and you just don't physically see it. And which is one of the things I was going to talk to you about too, is you had an experience. One of the things that you had an experience with back in 2015. Tell my listener what you bumped into, what you experienced.
All right. So there's a conference back in, I attended in 2014, 2015, and 2016. I spoke there in 2014. I did kind of my slide presentation about the different types of aliens, and I believe that's still available on YouTube for people who want to watch that. It's a great way to kind of see my drawings and everything I had to say about the basic categories of aliens. But so after the conference is over, the organizers would invite some of the speakers and friends to go to a house on a lake there in rural Maine. And so at the lake house in 2015, I was able to spend like a whole week there. And towards the end of that week, there was the September 3rd, 2015, there was some rain in the morning. It's been fairly humid, but it wasn't too bad that day. But then in the afternoon, I guess it was around 1:30 p.m., so next to the house is a wooded gully, and Audrey, who kind of organized the conferences, because she called us out of the house onto the deck there to see what was happening in the gully, and there was a tree that was coming down. And the funny thing about how the tree was falling is it was almost like there was an invisible force like twisting at it or pushing and pulling it, and it was coming down like in stages, kind of to collapse across the gully. And then so around 2 o'clock, Audrey and her twin sister and I were like sitting at the rim of the gully, and there were other witnesses as well, but we were looking at, the tree was almost on its side at this point, and we were looking at it was like bushes, but it's actually the top of the tree there down in the gully, and it looked like an area of branches on the tree would sink down and then spring back up again, and then a few feet away, like it would like crush down again. And the impression I had was something like a gorilla was like jumping from one area of the branches to another. but you couldn't see anything. So I was actually joking with Audrey about the Predator. If you've seen the Predator movies, you know, this invisible being who hunts humans, and where I was saying, look for the 3 laser dots where he's like trying to target you or whatever, you know, and because it was kind of like that, only it was perfectly invisible because you couldn't see any sort of silhouette or outline or shimmering in the air or any effects like that. It was just like you could see the weight of it, and then when it would move, you would see the branches, the tension is released and the branches spring back up. So that was around 2:00. We kind of, you know, went back into the house, and at that point, if I'd just gone home and that was the last thing I'd said, I would say what probably happened was the tree was coming down and there were some branches caught under other branches, and maybe a branch would snap and then the branches would spring up, and so it created the illusion that there was some invisible thing hopping about in the branches. But that's not where my experiences ended. On that afternoon. So I worked with Debbie to do, Debbie's Audrey's sister. I was working with her to do an illustration of an alien that she'd seen, some years before, I believe. And then while I was working, I guess I was sitting with her on the deck, and Lee, who's this funny guy from England, he went down into the gully with Raquel, and they were like sitting down there watching something, and I didn't know exactly what they were seeing. But then I hear Lee comes running up out of the gully, shouting, "Bloody effing hell!" and that something had really spooked him, and so I was my curiosity was piqued at that point. And then a little later, you know, after I finished doing my drawing with Debbie, I went down there where Raquel had coaxed Lee to come back, you know, telling him, sit there, respect it, you know, don't be afraid. And I got, so as I was walking down there, now by this time it's around 4:20 p.m., and I was walking down into the gully, seeing Lee and Raquel sitting there. It looked like they were watching something in the bushes, which again is really the top of the tree that had come down. So I was just a few feet away when I see this large movement in the bushes or the treetop there, and I say, you know, not out loud, but in my own mind, I say, so they've just been animal this whole time. Looks like maybe there's a raccoon in there, or, you know, I know there had been a porcupine that wanders around the property sometimes, so maybe there's a porcupine or something climbing in the branches. So I'm looking to see the animal because I should be able to see the animal, and I'm not seeing it. So, well, I know from the size of the movements I should be seeing it. Okay, so maybe it's something smaller than I thought. Maybe it's a squirrel, or maybe there's a bird in there. And I'm looking, and I'm not seeing even a squirrel or a bird. And so what's going on in my mind at this point is I've seen this movement, so I know that movement, you know, because I certainly spent a lot of time in the woods, and when you see a snake or a lizard or something on the ground, you see a movement on the ground, you hear a certain type of sound, and you say, okay, I know a lizard or a snake made that, or I know a squirrel made that movement. You can kind of tell by the way the vegetation moves what sort of animal it is. And this basically, I'm saying there's definitely an animal there, and if there's an animal there, I should be able to see it, and I can't see it. So therefore it's invisible. And that was like the moment I realized this is like my first really unambiguous paranormal experience. Like, this is a contradiction in reality. That I know it's not the branches just releasing tension or something like that. So whatever's going on, there is something paranormal. And so I sat down there with Lee and Raquel, and then Debbie came down and joined us a few minutes later. And we sat there till like 5 o'clock watching these movements. There's at least one large one, maybe two, but maybe just one that I'd describe as either a large chimpanzee or a small gorilla. that would like jump from here to here. You know, the branches would sink down. You'd see it definitely has weight. It has physical strength. It can shake the branches. Then I'd see little movements of like individual clumps of leaves or whatever. And when I see those movements, the image that came into my mind was that of like a marmoset or one of those small monkeys that lives in South America. So my conclusion was that there were multiple smaller ape-like or monkey-like creatures and then one large ape-like creature, or maybe two. And we watched it, and I guess the activity kind of died down after a while, and we would reach our hands out and say, touch us, but we never felt anything. It never touched us. And it's like we couldn't smell anything. Like you'd think if you're that close to a great ape, you're going to smell an odor. But there was no odor. There was no sound other than the sound the plants were making. There was no vocalizations. You couldn't hear it breathing. So whatever it was, my feeling is it was interdimensional, and it was only just enough in our 3D reality to where it could like put its weight on the branches and it could shake the branches with physical strength. But it couldn't actually, it wasn't like breathing our air, or it wasn't like chemically interacting with our environment or anything like that. So yeah, that was definitely the most paranormal thing I've ever experienced.
That's kind of cool, though, isn't it? In hindsight, when you start going through there and you start kind of checking off the little what the heck was it checklist in your head, thinking, okay, it couldn't have been this, it could have been that, and you start to second guess it. But you had other people there to support you in it.
There were over the course of that whole afternoon, there were, I think, about seven witnesses or so. So Debbie and Audrey both observed it from the rim. Then Debbie joined me and Lee and Raquel. And then I think there were, like, Sandy was there, and there were maybe a couple other people who I'm forgetting at the moment. But yeah, there were several witnesses to it. So I like the fact that I can say that everyone pretty much agrees on what we saw, and that we kind of eliminated any kind of prosaic explanation, which was just something to do with tensions in the branches and unseen branches that were breaking or something. Because it did take a while for the tree, and there was actually a couple of these trees kind of coming down. But we could tell this movement was not caused by that. It was caused by an animal of some kind. And the impression we all had was that it was ape or monkey or gorilla, something in the arboreal primate category. And so we thought, could it be related to Bigfoot? But it wasn't. Bigfoot, you think of a huge biped, and it was, I think it was a smaller than a Bigfoot. So maybe it's like a Littlefoot. I don't know.
Well, and those have been seen out here in the Pacific Northwest, or actually north of where I am, between the border of the 49th parallel border, North Washington State into British Columbia. But you get up just south of Alaska, the First Nations up there talk about a creature that looks like Bigfoot, but is only about 2 or 3 feet tall. They're not in the trees; they're on the forest floor. They're similar to what you just described as Littlefoot. They wouldn't be bouncing around the treetops. These things are all like forest floor type beings.
Well, definitely when they knocked the tree down, which is what we believe happened. They were definitely in the tree or climbing around the base of it, and then pretty much all that we could see of them, they were in the branches. But again, the branches were very low to the ground for most of that time. And then later in the evening, around 10 or 10:30, after it was dark, Lee and I went down there, and this was odd because we could hear something walking in the leaves, but when we would shine the flashlight, even though we were hearing it, we couldn't see any branches moving, any leaves moving or anything. So it's almost like earlier in the day it was materialized enough to actually move the branches and stuff, but now it was just like we were only hearing the sounds of it walking. So I assume that was the same being as maybe this large ape, and it was actually walking bipedally at that point later in the evening. instead of climbing in the branches. But again, couldn't explain the fact that I wasn't seeing anything moving, even though we could hear it walking.
Oh, that's interesting. We are talking to David Chace. David is a forensic artist. How's that? Who interviews experiencers of ET and draws what they see. Amazing. I think that's really, really cool. I've never run into somebody who does that. Well, other than watching it on Dead Files when Amy gets an artist to draw a picture of the ghosts. But yeah, this is fascinating. And I know a number of people down not too far from where you are, right? Lady psychic down in Maple Valley, Washington, just down the road to Tacoma and turn east. She was on her way back from actually one of the paranormal conferences down in California, and a reptilian popped into her passenger seat. She was on the way. That's where it was. And the reptilian was basically trying to talk her out of going. Because what she does is she takes people through regressions of the time they lose during an event with an ET or a UFO event. They'll lose time, and what Skeeter does is take them through the regression and fills that time in. And I guess this guy was coming in saying, "Hey, look, you're not supposed to be doing that," and she just ignored him, and off he went. But yeah, that was I should get her to talk to you.
Well, that brings to mind something that happened in 1995 when I was kind of, I was very active during that period, but it was February, I believe, 1995. So I had a researcher friend that goes out with MUFON on investigations, and she and her husband together were involved with MUFON, and so I got a phone call, I guess, during the middle of the week, and I have the dates somewhere, but I don't have that handy, but I believe it was in February of 95, that she had an encounter in her bedroom in the middle of the night with these beings. Like, I believe there were 4 of these beings, maybe 5, that we came to call the football heads, because the head was shaped kind of like of a football standing on its end with kind of a cone shape at the top and sort of a pointed chin. But I don't know if you've seen the movie Communion, where Whitley Strieber's got the little blue beings with all the ridges and folds in the skin. But the skin was very similar to that. It had all these horizontal folds in it. And the eyes, in 95, she described the eyes as having round pupils. And later, I think in 2012, I went back and talked to her, and she said she remembered them as vertical. So I feel like some aspects of the memory maybe changed over the intervening decades, but in any case, I did take notes and do drawings back in 95, and the being, basically what had happened is that she had a dream that night in which she and some other people were driving out to do a UFO investigation and interview a family who'd seen something. And then aliens showed up and stopped the car and were reaching into the car and grabbing her by the arm, and they were telling her, "Don't go to do this investigation." And then she woke up out of the dream, and the aliens were standing around the bed, these football head beings, and then I guess the leader one, who was wearing a robe, whereas the other ones were wearing sort of like jumpsuits, was trying to stare into her eyes and tell her to, don't do the investigation, telepathically, and then she was telling them, "Disengage yourself from me, disengage," and she was trying to not look in their eyes, and she felt this heat, it felt like they were heating her up somehow, and it was like she was gonna catch on fire or something. But after some period of time, I guess they just disappeared. And then she went into the bathroom, and her face was red, flushed, like a sunburn or something. And then she talked to her husband, I guess, in the morning or shortly after that. And then he said he'd gotten a call after she had already gone to sleep, from Peter Davenport of the National UFO Reporting Center, saying that had been this sighting in Maple Valley, and Peter was asking if they could go out and do an investigation and meet with this family. And that corresponded to what happened in her dream, and then the following weekend we did go out and attempt to interview the family, but the husband wasn't cooperative. The husband wasn't there at the time, but like 2 or 3 of the witnesses were minors, were the children, and then the mother was there, but the husband didn't give us his blessing. So after talking to them for a few minutes, then he called and basically said, well, these MUFON people have to leave. And so we didn't do a full investigation, but we did. I was able to do like some drawings of where there was a craft, a couple of different craft, and some military planes that came in that were like trying to chase the UFOs away, and that the children had seen some sort of alien in the field, although it didn't look like the football heads. So I don't know if the football head beings were like connected with the beings in the craft, or if they were an adversarial group of aliens or what. But the football head beings apparently were trying to discourage MUFON from doing this investigation. But of course, you know how MUFON is, and especially this friend of mine. So we didn't let that deter us. But ultimately, it was human concerns. If you're working with minors, you need the blessings of the parents. Yeah. So we did have to abort. But it's interesting. It does say how they can enter your dreams. They can show up physically, although a couple of the beings were standing like partially superimposed through the bed. Like they seem to be solid there, but they could be partially phased out. Like when people talk about the little grays walking through walls and furniture and stuff, I guess it's similar to that.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody at one of the conferences, and their abduction was thwarted because the two or three grays would be on each side of them in a bed, and they would raise the person up like they were going through the ceiling, but they weren't doing their job properly because the human, wasn't going through the ceiling. He would keep bumping into the ceiling, and then they'd have to bring him back close to the bed and go try again, and he'd hit the ceiling, but for some reason they weren't able to pull this person through the ceiling. I guess like it was common.
I know a woman who had basically the same experience. In this case, I think she just remembers seeing the grays standing and I guess they were like partially materialized, like they seemed to be semi-transparent or something from what I remember. But she was basically stuck up against the ceiling, and it was one of those popcorn ceilings where they put in the little pellets or whatever to break up the echo. And so it kind of hurt that her face kept ramming into this popcorn ceiling, and like the grays were there like kind of telepathically saying, oh no, she's not going through. What do we do? What do we do? And they didn't know what to do, because they just have like one little job, and they're not, it's usually some taller gray somewhere up on the ship who really kind of is the mind behind the supervisor or whatever. The little grays, they just go fetch you, and they don't know how to handle every situation that comes up.
Oh, crap. Wait, Tom, you didn't bring that thing. The thing that makes them go through the roof. No, I thought you brought it. No.
Yeah, kind of like that.
That was very interesting, the way this fellow was explaining it to me. I pictured in my head these very confused little aliens. Like, what the heck? This is supposed to work. What type of blood do you have? I wonder if it's a form of where we are in our own consciousness, whether or not we kind of permit them to do that, or wonder even if it is something that we have choice over, whether it's our subconscious or our spirit or soul has some kind of decision-making part of our abductions, like it's something we're supposed to do, and if it's not, then we maybe just hold ourselves back. Who knows? I always say we'll find out when we're dead, and don't want to ask too many questions while we're living, because we might find out, and then they'll take us because there's no use being here anymore. I
figure we're here to experience the not knowing, but part of experiencing the not knowing is trying really hard to find out.
Oh yeah, I've been the last little while. I've been thinking about a guy named Jim Mars, an author that I interviewed, and he wrote a book on JFK and the assassination, which the movie, Oliver Stone's movie, was based on, and huge conspiracy theorist in regards to JFK, and passed away a couple of years ago. And I kind of smiled to myself when I heard he passed away, because I thought, well, yeah, now. Like you've been since 1960s. You've been going full bore on trying to drill down in what happened, and getting all sorts of information that pulls you in 10 different directions away from what the story is from the government. But now you're on the other side.
Yeah.
You've got access to the books.
He's got the answers now.
Yeah, and it's like, damn it! If I can only, I want to go back and do another book, which is bizarre. We're talking to David Chace. He is out of Seattle, Washington. If you want to talk to him or chat with him about some stuff, he's on Facebook. I'll nag him before the end of the show to write a book and to create a giant website, which will cost him hundreds of dollars a year for no apparent reason. But David Chace is on Facebook. David Chace is CHACE, David Chace. Check him out there. Now, you are also, you kind of manage a couple of other Facebook pages, Extraterrestrial Life and Reptilian Gates, where there's a lot of different artwork by people who submit their art to those pages of what they've experienced or what they think is out there. So it's kind of interesting to go through, and I see a lot of your art there. And one of the ones I was fascinated, you do have, we were talking about the composite drawing, you do have a whole bunch of eyes for reptilians there. So, you can always say, hey, pick an eye group. You kind of key more towards the reptilian side of things, but what is the most fascinating perceived alien that you've had to sketch, or that someone's come to you with?
My friend Bridget Smith, she interacted with, our guess is close to, I mean, she used to say he was 9 feet tall, but then she looked at the memory a little more and says it's probably closer to maybe 7.5 or 8 feet, somewhere in that range. But he's a reptilian. He's extremely muscularly built. We call him Captain because on the craft she was on, he was seemed to be, the basically the commander of the craft. So I think he's got generally smooth scales. He's very dark, kind of a dark coffee brown, almost blackish, but more brown. And then he's got a chest. Initially, we thought the chest was just like marbly scales, almost like regular scales. But later on, she recalled, actually, it's more like, she described it as dough rolls, which is like a horizontal folds or something. Of course, if you're familiar with snakes, we call those ventral scales or ventral scutes, which are just those horizontal scales that go across the belly and the chest. I'm trying to remember the hands, if it was 4 fingers and a thumb. I think he has 4 fingers and a thumb. I hope I'm getting this right, Bridget, so she can correct me, But he has some webbing. I think the webbing was out to like the first knuckle. The webbing's not like all the way out. And a lot of these reptilians, like, they have some characteristics that remind people of amphibians, but they seem to mostly have like a dry skin with scales, which is more like a reptile. Except I guess he's got patches under his arms where he didn't have any scales. So he had a little bit of the amphibian characteristics, but he's one of the most fascinating to me, I guess because I was able to work with her for quite a long time to get visual details on him and so forth. And he was very friendly, actually even loving, and he apparently is a scientist. One of her first memories of him was there was a portal, which is like kind of sort of a circular or oval shaped, I guess it was like bluish glowing opening in the air that was like in her yard, and then he was walking around holding what she described as like an iPad, but it was like transparent. If you've seen those transparent like screens that they've got monitors now, which are like, there's not generally available yet, they're still very expensive, but it's like you can see through them, but you can also, if you hold it, you can see the whatever image displayed on it at the same time. So it was like that. She said it was like a backless iPad, and that's how she describes it now. But of course, it was like in the early 90s, like 91, 92, I guess, when maybe 90, somewhere in there when she had this encounter. So they didn't have iPads yet. But that's one of the most interesting. And of course, that's the reptilian. And then, of course, there are the praying mantis types. They're the human-looking ones, often called Nordics, because sometimes they have those Scandinavian features. And then there's the grays. I've talked to a couple people who've seen like the Littlefoot, which is like a small version of Bigfoot. One of those cases was on the Sammamish Plateau here in Washington State. And that case involved a small, hairy being. The guy was, I guess he was on his motorcycle at the time. He was driving through, these were like the early 90s, I think, when it was still very wooded in that area. And he was driving along and like he caught this glimpse of this small, hairy, sort of ape-like being, like stumbles on in this, like there was this little gorge in the ground or whatever you call it, a little, like almost like a stream bed or something, and where the being seemed to trip and stumble and then looked, and then he looked and they made eye contact, and at that moment he got this strong impression that said, "You're not really seeing me, are you?" It's like it wasn't actually words, but it was almost like the thought that was an impression that was powerful enough that he was able to formulate the words in his own mind. And it's like the being didn't really want to be noticed, it seems. So that there's that case. But I've met people who've described all sorts of different types, but they tend to be mostly grays, reptilians, human-looking ones, or the mantis-like ones are kind of the more common types that people describe. Then there's some that glow like light beings, but if you actually ask them for the description of the bodies, they're more like a gray or a hybrid or something like that.
Do you ever get people talking about the light beings that look like cats?
Okay. So I think I can talk about this now. Josie Gallant, she passed away in 2015. She was abducted by the Greys like a lot during the earlier part of her life, and she had a good long life. So that was like probably back in the 60s or 70s or something, like a long time ago. But she had encounters with. She never, well, apart from the night when there was one thing at the end of her bed, but it was dark, so she couldn't really see exactly what it looked like. It looked like a giant cat. But she would get impressions in her mind of what these beings look like, that they look like upright, kind of like domestic cats that stand upright. But when she actually saw them physically, I think all she was able to see was maybe some sparkles and pastel colored light or something, like it was there interdimensionally, but she never physically saw it like materialized. And they apparently were some sort of cat being that was interdimensional and like man-sized and very advanced, almost more of a paranormal thing, but then might have been a UFO-related thing, and it kind of that's all crosses over. There's
a whole other race of ETs. They're Lyrian, Lyran, and they look like lions or cats, but they're bipedal, and they're typically standing at the foot of your bed looking at you.
And I've heard about those beings before. My thing though is if I have not come across enough cases where I don't think I've ever met someone who's actually seen one of those beings in the flesh. And I was able to examine it and see in detail, yes, it had these feline features and these, and so I can say that that's an impression that they communicate to people, right. But whether they actually are a physical being that looks like that is a physical species like, the Greys definitely. I mean, people see these small childlike beings with big heads. The beings come into their houses and pick up objects and things. So definitely the Greys are a physical being which has that in appearance. But my feeling is that these cat-like beings, Lyrans or whatever, they may be more interdimensional, and they may not be a physical race of ETs that comes on a craft or something like that. Or maybe, I mean, there's all different levels to this phenomenon, so I can't really say.
No, and that's the interesting part, is we can't really say, and it's speculation, but it's a lot of fun to, when I talk to people who have had experiences with these, and I was just talking to a ET experiencer she's been carried off numerous times since she was a little kid, and she was telling me about, and she's also a psychic, and she was also going through, what was it? We were going through all the different beings. Her name is Maisha Johnson, John Stone. Sorry, Maisha.
I know her well, actually. I mean, I used to attend her groups, and that's kind of when I first got to know Bridget Smith, when we were both attending those groups together.
Yeah, she's the one who really got me pointed in that whole Lyrian kind of thing, and the interdimensional, and the moving. And I talked to a girl years ago, Akiane Krameric. Now, Akiane, very, very interesting story. And one of my podcasts, two of my podcasts, is a 2-part interview with Akiane. Aki, at the age of 4 or 5, what was it, 4 or 5? 5. Let's call it 5 now, because I can't remember. She grew up in an atheist family, no Bible in the house, homeschooled by her mother, and kind of living, literally in a little farmhouse in Illinois, at the corner of a cornfield. And she got up one morning and told her mother that Jesus came and took her up into space. And her mother's like, where did you get that name from? And what did this person look like? And at the age of 4 or 5, she was drawing, she drew about at the level of a 20-year-old. And she said, well, I can draw him. I just need the model. And at the age of 8, believe it or not, it was a carpenter working down the street at another farm, and heard that, Akiane was just looking for a tall guy, chestnut brown hair with a beard, or dark brown hair and a beard. And he knocked on the door and said, hi, I heard you're looking for a model. And she looked at him and said, yeah, you're the guy. So she paints this 3x4 oil painting, and it was called The Prince of Peace. And that was describing what this person who called himself Jesus looked like. Other things, and she'd been interviewed on Good Morning America and Oprah and all these other shows, and of course they talked to her about, this is really nice and very spiritual and Christian and the whole bit. And of course I'm off on a tangent going, so did you see anything else when you go into space? Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of light things, glowing light beings, and they had the faces of cats, and we got off in this whole other tangent, and missing time. And I said, have you ever missed time, around 10 hours? And she goes, yes, I have. In fact, I was told I was gone for 10 hours. And when I walked out of my bedroom, the FBI and the police were there, and they were all, gobsmacked. And I walked out of my bedroom. They said, where have you been? And she said, I've been asleep in my room. And they said, no, you haven't. We got policemen looking for you for 10 hours. Well, in my dream, I went up into space, and it was with these light beings. And so I kind of said, and again, she's still no television, no radio and things like that in her home. And just as she was when she was little, she didn't know other people had those experiences too. And she's a binary genius. She's a genius at oil painting.
I think I have her book, actually.
Yeah.
I have a lot of art books and stuff, and I think she does some really fascinating images.
Yeah, she did images from space on one of these trips that she goes on at night, and she has an image painted of the universe, but from a point of view you have to be outside, on the other side, to look at. It's like looking back, if that makes sense. Am I making any sense? Because I'm moving my hands around to give you the demonstration here. Of course, you can't see it. But yeah, she painted a picture of the universe, our universe, from an angle that you would have to be looking at it from the outside looking in, which you can't get. And yeah, so there's clues. as we in the police community would call it, that's a clue of something a little further out there than anticipated. But again, she was talking about these beings, almost orb shaped, but they had the faces of cats. And that's why I was asking you if you ever had but again, I wonder if there is that difference. Like Lyrians, or these lion cat-like beings, don't abduct people.
Yeah, well, so, I kind of, when I was starting out in like the 80s, I followed a lot of Bud Hopkins research. And of course, he always talks about, well, how in the cases he was dealing with, about 80% of them, people describe some sort of grays. Not all the grays look alike, but in a particular case, they typically look alike, except that they might be tall ones and short ones. But he did mention, that there are other types. I don't think he ever came across a cat-like one, but he said, well, yeah, in a small percentage of case, we have the human-looking ones, or the reptilians, or the ones that look like a giant praying mantis. But I think some of these, he preferred the term UFO occupants, because it was pretty much always a UFO, a craft that would pick someone up. Either they'd walk onto it, like as if compelled somehow, or else they'll levitate through the ceiling and be put aboard that way. But I have a feeling maybe these cat-like beings, like the ones my friend Josie Gallant had seen that seem to be interdimensional, that maybe they're not a solid being that comes in a craft that then lands in a field or something, that maybe they're interacting with us on some other level. But I do think in Akiane, you talked about her missing time and how, a lot of people have had this experience often when their children, like when their family's looking for them for maybe a whole afternoon and they're missing, and then they'll just show up and they don't remember being gone. And so I think it's those sorts of physical situations that ground some of this in physical reality, even though we don't actually have a body of an alien that we can point to or something. Still, it's all part of so many physical circumstances are involved with these experiences. Well, I was on a craft and I had a needle go into me, and now I have a needle mark, that kind of thing. So, I think that all gives it stronger evidence for it. And yet it also bleeds over into all these kind of spiritual kind of things where it's almost like spiritual beings are communicating with us, trying to maybe start a new religion or something like that. I mean, it makes you think, oh, maybe that's how some of our religions got started, with interaction with these other beings.
Well, if you Google a Lyrian or alien lion, you're going to get pictures of those Greek gods, Egyptian gods that are, a human with a lion's head. And, so it kind of begs the question, well, is, back in the day in Egypt, is that what they were, were they actually having communication with these things that looked like people, but they had the head of an ibis or the head of a lion or whatever animal, jackal or something that they had at the time. The Lyrians they're called star seeds, star seed children in alien races. But is that because it's just something? It's easy for us as 21st century humans to put them in that box? Because we're just not open-minded enough to go the next mile yet.
Well, I don't think we're in a place to understand. I mean, we can understand that now we've actually discovered exoplanets, planets of other suns, and we know that there's thousands of planets out there. And so we can understand that, yes, on some other planet, life evolved and they developed technology. Maybe they built spaceships. So when we see what looks like a spaceship showing up in the sky, we say, well, that must be a craft from another world. But they've been apparently interacting with us for so long. And then you can look at things like, I don't know if you've read Raymond Fowler's books on the Andreessen affair, Betty Andreessen Lucas experiences. but for her, it's part of her Christianity, because she was a strong Christian, and it was, of course, I'm an atheist, so I'll just make that known now, but at the same time, I'm not the kind of like materialist atheist who dismisses the spiritual. I think the spiritual is on maybe a continuum with the physical world in some way. Actually, I've been leaning towards theories that saying physical reality is just an illusion and it's really just all consciousness, but I won't go into that right now. But yeah, there's definitely that this has been with us, with humanity, for a long time, and it borders like people, and Betty Anderson Luca, she, in her experiences, the beings would come and they had a little device that could induce an out-of-body experience, and then she would go up out of body and interact with beings, and she would turn into a light being, and other people would be there in the form of a light being, and then it reminds me of a case, another researcher, Joe Lewell's author of The God Hypothesis and one or two other books on these UFO encounters, talked about a case where some of these reptilians would leave their body, and outside of their body people would see them as a light being. So it just makes you wonder, about what the connection is with our history of religion and spirituality and so forth.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, and it's just we perceive we get an answer for one question, and it just opens a door for 300 or 400 other questions right after that. I find it fascinating. Like you were talking about. Oh God, his name just totally escaped me there for a second. Bud Hopkins, late Bud Hopkins, who, again, he was an artist, and he was a painter, sculptor, and very prominent in talking about alien abductions throughout his time. And again, one of those guys who knows the answer now because he passed away a couple of years ago. But his interest and because of his popularity with or his fame really with art, he did have a really good audience. And when I want to say a captive audience, and when he started talking about the alien abductions, he really brought that out and got that a little bit more mainstream than it had been for many. Well, it had been, and very, very interesting guy in his life and his experiences. His one of the things I want to touch on, again, going back to the reptilians and the various reptilian races. One of them, which I've always heard being a little bit more very, very strong and kind of guarding being, was the side of the reptilians called the Draconians, or Draco. Does that make sense? I'm not really overly familiar with the races, but that one seemed to be more of like a one that would be a guard or a higher vibration being.
I've heard the term before. Now, problem is, there's
so many.
Yeah, and when you talk to you talk to like a channeler, and they'll give you one categorization. You talk to a contactee over here, they'll give you another categorization. You talk to another channeler channeling a different entity, they'll give you another categorization. So, the term Drac or Draco or Draconian, it means different things to different people, and you might be describing 10 different alien races, and people are just all calling them Dracos or whatever. So it's important that in my research, I usually try to stick to the physical description, because at least from a biological standpoint, my background is in evolutionary biology, so I know that at least a particular species on Earth, like if you take a garter snake, it has a certain pattern of scales on its head, it's got certain kind of scales on its back, it's got a certain anatomy, color patterns, and so forth. So you can distinguish species by that physical description, but if you have a name and then different people kind of giving their own take on it, it's very hard to actually pin down. So I just say they're at least dozens, hundreds of different species, even among reptilians. From the variation I've seen, it seems like dozens of different types. And I don't know what they all are. I can tell you that this type looked like this, that this person saw, and this other one looked like that. But so yeah, be careful. My advice to everyone is kind of be careful with getting too caught up, taking too literally one particular individual's way of classifying the races, because you'll find other ones that contradict that.
Yeah, I guess, again, being human, we want to put everything into a box and we want to label it so it's nice and neat, and we can say this is what this is and that is what that is, and that's it. No, because it's a sense of control. It's, and the loss of control, or the perceived loss of control, is what stress is. Yeah. We don't want to be stressed out with aliens. We just want to control it.
You have to find that place inside where you're just at peace with not knowing all those things, because if you're not at peace with not knowing, then you'll fool yourself into believing that you know.
That's what I do every day when I get up. Okay, maybe it is a little bit. We've been talking to David Chace. He is out of Seattle, Washington. Please, if you have any more questions for David, because I know he just wanted to stay up all night long answering your questions. Please, see what I'm doing to you? If you go bounce over to his Facebook page, David Chace, that's Chace, and his Facebook page has what is it? It's a picture of... Oh, it looks like the plateaus up in Washington State area. It's tumbleweeds. Or it's
actually Colorado, but...
That's Colorado? Okay.
Or is it Utah? I think it's... I forget now. Actually, I could probably look at it right now. Yeah, but in any case, I think it's Colorado or Utah when I was traveling in 2005. But yes, just as facebook.com/David W. Chace. Chace is Chace. I'll try to get back to people, but it's again, I don't always get back to everyone, and it may take me some time. It just depends on how overwhelmed I get.
Yeah, and please buy his book. Oh no, you haven't written it yet. Oh, never mind.
I did have a visual guide to alien beings that I self-published in 1995, and I sold that for a few years, but I kind of stopped with that one. It was just a kind of a collection of notes, and I know there's a lot of people who still want it, but whether it'll ever come back, I don't know. I kind of doubt it. Because eventually I'll get something else out, but again, I have to. Yeah, I'm waiting for the inspiration and the motivation to happen, and the stars have to line up just right.
Yeah,
but eventually, there probably will be another book.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I'll give you a heads up, because it's coming. There's going to be a need for something like that, and remember what you're doing. You're you're a forensic artist who is talking to experiencers and getting feedback from the witness and creating a drawing of the being they encountered to their satisfaction. Is that a word? Satisfaction? Satisfaction. That's the word. Oh, my God. Satisfaction that it was the being that they actually saw. So your notes and your drawings mean a lot for people who haven't seen it, or maybe have, and feel a little bit of comfort when they know somebody else saw the same thing and they didn't get eaten, or they're not going to get eaten next Wednesday, kind of thing. So, there is a market for that. There is a interest in that out there.
Let me refer people to some YouTube. I just did a quick search. I typed in David Chace aliens as three words in YouTube. I remember Chace is Chace. There's one I see came up, interview Brenda Astorino did with me called Visitor to Earth with David Chace Part 2. Probably if you click on that, you get to Part 1 as well. The one I'm probably most proud of, it says Experiencers Speak 3 David Chace, and that one is my 2014 presentation. Lasted about 52 minutes, where I show a whole ton of my artwork and describe like all the major types of aliens that people have talked about with me. There's interviews I've done. There's a couple from Journey with Brenda Roberts, which that was public access television from the 90s. So those are my really early appearances. Probably must have been around 95, 96, 97, sometime in there. There's an interview on Disclosure Now with special guest David Chace. So there's a few things. You type in David Chace and aliens, and you'll find some things on YouTube. And then after you've watched that, then if you have questions, come to me. Or, if you want to come to me on Facebook, you can do that. But those are some ways to learn more about my work.
Perfect. Well, and thank you much for your time, David. Next time I'm down in Seattle, we'll hook up for a cup of tea somewhere and flip through some of your pictures. It'd be really interesting.
That's great. I love doing these interviews, so thank you for having me.
Let's roll. And hey! Let's be careful out there.